Homelessness is a place that we never want to be. But whatever circumstances led them to that place, there are people who literally have nothing but the clothes on their back and depend on the kindness of others to get by. However, there are some people who exploit that kindness when they don't need it at all. Here are the fakest homeless people who got exposed. Mika Dominguez. How would you be able to handle it if you saw a seemingly homeless person begging on the street and then get into a vehicle? Well, a few men didn't want to see her begging continue. Mika Dominguez made quite a stir in May 2017 when she was confronted by two men about her homeless status. She had been begging for money at a median on a street in Virginia, but then she was spotted heading to a car and the two men confronted her. They also confronted her about getting government assistance that she didn't actually need. She changed her tune to then say that she was disabled. Not wanting to deal with the confrontation, she went into a McDonald's to make a complaint about the men, but the workers couldn't help her. Overnight, the video went viral and got a couple million views. The next day, Dominguez was taken into custody, but not for faking her homelessness. It was actually because she was throwing full Gatorade bottles at cars. Needless to say, Dominguez became known as the fake homeless woman, and the internet jumped for joy once it was announced that she was behind bars. Gary Thompson. We all have a name, and we might have earned a nickname or two. For Gary Thompson, he earned the title of Bogus Beggar of Kentucky. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Well, he deserves it. Thompson became famous for going all over the bluegrass state begging for money. He was not only claiming to be homeless, but also disabled. To make the act more convincing, he even sported a wheelchair. He also changed his speech pattern to sound like he was mentally disabled. Did we mention that Thompson had a degree in speech pathology? He seemed to have gotten away with it. That is until he started bragging that he was making six figures tax-free thanks to his phony panhandling efforts. He was eventually exposed and questioned by Crime Watch Daily. Surprisingly, after getting confronted, he just hopped on a bus and went someplace else to continue his fake homeless act. This led Thompson to get a 14-month prison sentence for passing a bad check, as well as an extra 7 months for assault. Once the public realized that Thompson's act was a ruse, they were grateful for not only his exposure, but also that he was put behind bars. Fifth Avenue Beggar. Fifth Avenue is a place where some of the richest people in the world congregate. With stores like Tiffany's, Gucci, and Prada, there are sure to be some rich people who are willing to part with a few dollars. This unknown woman took advantage of the opportunity before she was exposed as a bogus beggar by Inside Edition, one of the biggest news outlets in the United States. For days, the news team watched this woman beg for money on Fifth Ave, bending over on crutches and shaking an empty cup. The performance was quite pathetic. It was enough to make the news team get suspicious, so they followed her as she got on a bus. After she got off the bus, she got into a minivan. What came out of the minivan was a completely different woman who walked normal and was spending her hard-earned cash. To be sure the whole thing was a ruse, the Inside Edition news team followed her for a few days. They noticed that she had normal clothes as well as work clothes. She was like an actress wearing a costume. When Inside Edition confronted her on the act, she never broke character and never acknowledged that she was fake, or even that she got caught. Simon Wright. Could you imagine making panhandling your entire career? That's what 37-year-old Simon Wright was doing. He was making about $65,000 a year while living in a British flat that is worth nearly $400,000. In the United Kingdom, you can be given something called an ASBO, which stands for Antisocial Behavior Order. This is a civil order. Once it was discovered that Wright wasn't homeless, even though he was begging for money with a sign that said homeless and hungry, he was given an ASBO that banned him from continuing the act. He also had to keep his dog muzzled because it apparently bit someone. Wright became known around London as a beggar, so when the news spread that he wasn't actually homeless, his patrons were quite upset. It was only a matter of time before Wright was caught begging again. But this time, this was in violation of his ASBO, so he was cuffed and taken into custody. The consequences of violating an ASBO is a 5-year prison sentence and a bunch of penalty fees. When asked why he was begging again, Wright said that he was still in debt and at risk of losing his home. One has to wonder if Mr. Wright thought his actions were worth it. Pregnant panhandler. We asked you before what you would think if you saw a homeless person get into a car. What would you think if they got into a $35,000 car? What if they were pregnant? It seems that if a beggar is with child, then people would be more willing to give money to try and to help out the poor mom-to-be. The pregnant panhandler was exposed by Inside Edition after a shopper spotted her getting into a Mercedes-Benz. The pregnant beggar was panhandling with a small boy at a mall in San Diego when shopper Melissa Smith caught her getting into the luxury car. Smith followed the car to another mall where the woman did the same thing, all while holding a sign that said, "Please help." A local station in San Diego tracked down the woman a few weeks later, but this time she was no longer pregnant and was holding an infant. She was also accompanied by a man. They all got into a brand new minivan that still had dealer tags. The tags were tracked down to an apartment north of the city that cost over $2,500 per month to rent. Let's take a break from the fakers and talk about a success story with our quiz. Which 007 actor was once homeless before he found fame? Find out at the end of the video. For now, back to exposing some epic fakery. Steve. If there is anyone that someone is willing to open their wallet for, it's homeless veterans. All over the world, there is a general consensus that veterans aren't being well taken care of. So when we see a former service member on the street, we want to help. But one man, in Devon, England, wanted to take advantage of his community's generosity. Known simply as Steve, he made a homemade scribbled sign saying that he had 18 years of service under his belt as a Royal Marine. However, his story raised some red flags with experts. Steve mentioned a Royal Marine service number and said he was part of the 42 Royal Marine Commando. When the number was looked up, it wasn't legit. Plus, the 42 Royal Marine Commando wasn't quite right, as people wondered if Steve meant the 42 CDORM. Steve also had a GoFundMe campaign and was begging for money. But veteran experts continued to see holes in his story until the campaign was taken down. One of the biggest giveaways was that veterans are usually too proud to reveal their service information and be that transparent. Not to mention, his face isn't seen, which means that Steve may not even exist. Bogus beggar ring. In Southern California, around areas like Santa Clarita and the San Fernando Valley, there seems to be a bogus beggar ring in the works. The homeless beggars all look the same. They are usually couples with small children, and they hang out in front of shopping centers and grocery stores. What gave this ring away was the fact that their signs all look the same. They all say something to the effect of losing their job, have several kids, and need money. Even though it was really hot outside, these people were using kids to gain sympathy and people's money. One of the producers from CBS 2 in Los Angeles interviewed one of the panhandlers, who said she had no phone and she took the bus to get around. But after following her, it was discovered she got into a rental car. In fact, all of these groups got into late model rental cars. This strongly indicates that this ring of fake homeless people are all part of one group and seem to report back to someone. Given that they all drive rental cars, faking homelessness seems to be their job, and they probably have a place to live. Big house life. Here's another case where a suspected homeless person was exposed as someone who was actually well off. In the previous entry, we learned about a ring of beggars, but there was no confirmation that they actually had a place to live. In this case, the fake homeless guy was followed to a really nice house. Comedian Jack Vale was given a tip from his uncle that he felt a homeless guy may not have been the real deal. So Jack set up surveillance and watched this guy collect cash from generous people until he left. Jack followed and watched the guy get into a really fancy car. The chase was on, and Jack and his team followed the guy until he arrived at a fancier house. Jack confronted the guy, who did not receive him well. Jack accused the guy of scamming people and being fake, but the guy basically said that Jack was jealous and hinted that standing outside begging for money all day was his job, before cursing at Jack and demanding that he get off his porch. Unfortunately, the guy's face couldn't really be seen, but if he's really scamming people and going home to an expensive house, his face should be seen. Audi luck. Thanks to social media, 35-year-old Matthew Brinton learned the hard way that social media can be rather cruel. Well, people don't appreciate finding out they gave their hard-earned money to someone who could take care of themselves. He was often seen on Bank Street in New Quay, Cornwall, with his border collie by his side, begging for money. However, when a video of himself emerged of him loading up an Audi TT, he became the subject of threats to end his life. You see, he was seen begging on the streets the same day that the video was captured. Then the Audi ended up getting a smashed windshield. Brinton claimed that he got the car from his late grandmother and that he was living with a friend. Brinton also claimed that the car was stolen from him, but the video said otherwise. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's homeless, even though he was begging on the street and trying to pass himself off as such. However, even though he has a roof over his head, he's dealing with his demons. He's a heroin addict with mental health issues, so the backlash he got from the video definitely did some damage to his psyche. Stephen Crozier. If there's someone who hasn't learned a lesson yet, that is Stephen Crozier. The UK government has been conducting a crackdown on bogus beggars, and Crozier is on their radar. In fact, he has had over 51 ASBOs issued to him, and calls all the orders stupid. Despite being exposed as a bogus beggar, he is still on the streets asking for money. Not to mention, he has a place to live and receives government benefits. For members of the public, it is probably one of the most heinous acts one can commit, and his name and face have been plastered all over like a public shaming. He has also been arrested several times for trespassing and begging in areas he's been banned from. In 2017 alone, Crozier has had at least 2 court appearances and disregards his begging ban every 18 days on average. With all of the arrests, fines, court appearances, etc., one has to wonder exactly what is going through Crozier's mind that he thinks it's all still worth it. Perhaps it's the adrenaline rush of breaking the rules and still getting away with the crime? It sounds like someone's government benefits might be on the chopping block soon. Which 007 actor was once homeless? That would be Daniel Craig. Before he was James Bond, Daniel Craig was waiting tables and sleeping on park benches in London. Thanks for joining us. What do you think of these fake homeless people? What would you do if you saw someone faking their bad circumstances? Tell us in the comments, and while you're here, give this video a like and check out some of our other awesome content